Welcome to Here Be Dragons, the podcast that explores the whole map of who we are, even the uncharted territory.
Hi, I'm Claire Paletti, founder and chief empowerment officer for the Dragonhood, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel, head of Fire Breathing, that's social media and content strategy, ready to engage you in everything that we have to offer. And we're excited to have this conversation today. As always, we'd like to give a reminder at the top of the episode that we are two cishet white women speaking from our personal experience and through our lens of the world. And we always welcome other viewpoints and other experiences. So today we're talking toxic workplaces. We'll be talking specifically about our individual experiences, how we survived, how we managed, and the time that we were in those situations, but then also how we escaped from those toxic workplaces. The workplaces that didn't work for us and didn't fit our needs. Now, I know that that's something that we've seen a lot of funny memes and reels and TikTok videos all about dealing with a toxic manager. And they're always very funny. I even share them with a group of friends currently. And, they're ways that we cope with a bad situation because it gives us something to laugh about. Because if we're not laughing about the situation, then we're taking it seriously and we're realizing that we are in an environment that's not healthy for us. And when we're not reaching our full potential, right? Because of all of these different factors that create a toxic workplace. So we're going to talk a little bit, first of all, about working and surviving in that kind of environment. And then we'll move on to really understanding different aspects of toxic workplaces. And then eventually at the end, we'll get into how to escape one if you're ready. If you're now just realizing that you're in a toxic workplace, what do you do? We'll give you some ideas and what personally worked for us. And then also give you some tools for how to move forward in the future.
Yeah, it's such a good call out, that sort of series of you're moving through that process, right? Of like realizing it's an environment that you don't love or is not working for you, and the power of reframing while you're in it and trying to figure out how to move to a new one. We'll talk about that too. And then also like really looking at how to empower yourself through the exit, through or if you don't have the luxury of leaving till you have something else lined up, how to keep yourself safe while you're moving through some of that other stuff. So I think it's going to be a good conversation and something we can all relate to. We've all, unfortunately, I think, had varying degrees of this, right? Whether you would classify it as a really negative experience at a job that you otherwise like, or if, a broadly a culture that just doesn't fit or work for you, or is all the way at that sort of toxic end of the spectrum, right? Where it's hurting your mind, body, and spirit to try and be in that environment every day. So looking forward to the conversation. It's going to be a tough one. I think we're going to be both being a little vulnerable with a little bit of feelings. So just want to express appreciation for that. And our hope is if we can do this and help someone else maybe recognize, gosh, I really relate to those feelings of anxiety or the overwhelm or the tears every day going into the car, like before I go into work, like we've been there. So we just want to help any one person we can would be well worth it. So here's to a great conversation.
Yes, get out sooner. That's the that's the goal. I'm really glad you made that distinction. Not every workplace that doesn't work for you is toxic. So many of them, it might just not be a good fit. But no matter the situation that you find yourself in, I think some of the things we talk about today could be helpful. So it's a very good distinction.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to start off talking a little bit about my work experience, specifically working and surviving for a very long time in an experience that wound up being at odds with my own values. So we've mentioned in some previous episodes that I am a librarian. I used to work for a public library, and I don't anymore. And for a number of reasons, but I stayed with it longer than I should have, which we just mentioned earlier. I stayed with it longer than I should have for a lot of reasons. a big one was vocational awe, a term that was coined, I want to say back in 2017. Uh, and that's when you work for perhaps a library or a nonprofit, or even if it's a corporation that is creating something that you highly believe in, you think of your workplace as having this greater good. And so it's so much harder for you to leave because you feel like you're letting people down. And so that's something that I think really kept me in the position I was, because I wanted to help people and I wanted to help the patrons of my county. And I felt like if I could stay and try to make things better, then it would be worth it. And I'm sure a lot of listeners are nodding their heads right now saying, "Oh yeah, that's why I'm, in X, Y, and Z place, because I think I can improve it and make it better." And sometimes you can, depending on the amount of power that you have in the organization. But a lot of times you can't. You can do little things to try, but if the bug doesn't stop with you, then things aren't really going to change probably drastically enough to warrant staying, if it's a situation where you feel um, unsafe or unwell in any way.
Yeah, that the idea of investing your personal well-being and your family's well-being and your partners and those around you, the well-being of the family and the household starts to suffer.
Mhm.
That's that trade-off. And I think we really learned a lot as far as like what we're willing to sacrifice, I think, as individuals through the pandemic.
Yes.
There's this level of gratitude to be employed, a gratefulness. And I know we've spoken about this too, Rachel, like the privilege of ascending to a certain level, or like, hey, this was, we'll talk about this later, but this was your dream job, right? Like this was something we even had conversations about um, you applying for, and it was aspirational and you're so excited, right? So like
Mhm.
there's a certain amount of processing that goes there that becomes gosh, I'm so lucky to be employed. I'm so grateful. Like, and that's a real challenge, right? So I want to be really clear that we're talking about the balance between, um, staying and making a difference when it fills you up and lifts you up and energizes you versus when it drains you and depletes you and causes strain on your personal relationship, your personal health,
Mhm.
um, all those types of things, right? So that's a really, and that's Rachel, what you experienced and what I've experienced at different points, but specifically
Right.
as we're talking about your experience, like that was absolutely something, just as a friend that I saw. So yeah.
Yeah, and and it's pretty telling when people all around you who know you in various stages can recognize the issues that your career is having on you, right?
Hmm.
And can see the progression of this, this excitement, and then suddenly it's not as exciting. Uh, Note for the audio, I'm pointing
Gesturing a
downhill.
downward slope.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um, So yeah, that I would advise, if I could, for people to listen to those that you trust their opinion around you too, when you're thinking about your workplace situation.
Yeah. And our friends and family are trusted people in our lives. They're better reflections of ourselves,
Mhm.
uh, in both directions, right? They're a better reflection. We tend to be harder on ourselves. And we'll talk about this too, but Rachel, you were saying things like, if I could just get a handle on, get more organized, if I could just insert
Mhm.
something here, then this would be better, tolerable, whatever. And, meanwhile, like your, your partner, husband, family members, friends are sort of saying like, hey, you seem like you're having a really hard time here.
Mhm.
And like there's a piece of too, I think, trusting that reflection back to yourself. And we don't trust that reflection of how great we are either as human beings, right? Like that's also true. I want everybody listening to think of that too. Like the people around you and you're like, oh, they're just being nice because they're whatever. Like, no, that is a more accurate reflection of your value than you have of yourself. That's
Mhm.
there's lots of articles on that. So let's also value that when we're sort of like trying to make these big decisions about employment and where to work and when we've crossed a line that's like no longer safe for ourselves.
And I do think some of that too, as women, I think we experience that, almost exponentially higher because we're almost taught to like downplay
Yes,
our achievements and and so we start to believe that too. It's like, oh well, it was a team effort, but no, you led the team, you did all of this, embrace that. But we've been socialized
absolutely.
not to.
And
Yeah.
I would layer in the invisible work of that we all sort of hold as well, of managing household, to being the running laundry list of groceries, meal prep, birthday parties, gifts, presents. All there's a laundry list of invisible work
Mhm.
that we also hold in addition to holding a stress or a strain of a workplace where we also hold invisible labor.
I was going to say that,
Yeah.
yes.
So we're holding a lot of things.
So, I mean, I'm glad you're talking about all this invisible work and the normal load that we're carrying in a job too, because once I got this position, and the other positions that I had held in this library system were not without their stresses. Of course, every job has them, and we had gone through some difficult periods already. Um, we had had an issue with the drag queen story hour that was run by a public group, not by the library itself, but they have access to public meeting rooms, just like everybody has access to public meeting rooms. And the branch manager who allowed it to happen, because they were following policy, was let go. Uh, Also, my brother,
Full
and so that is,
disclosure, this is like hitting personally. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So
And that was
that's
how many
already
years
happened.
ago, Rachel? Sorry to interrupt. That was how many years ago too, Rachel, right? Like that was before the
Yeah,
pandemic. So
it,
that's at least 3 years ago, maybe four at this
I think
point.
it was 4 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rachel
Um,
hung on for a good long time.
post that whole incident, and I envisioned myself storming out, with him, but I told myself, no, you stay and you keep fighting. And try to do things that make a difference. Go ahead and apply for this higher position, this position that is in fact your dream job, the one that you've been dreaming about since you got out of grad school. And when you're at this higher level, and I was doing the events and outreach for adults for the entire system, when you reach this higher level, you'll be able to make systemic change happen, and you'll be able to offer all these programs that show everyone that they can be included, and X, Y, and Z. I just had this laundry list of things that I wanted to do. When I got the position, I immediately started experiencing a lot of extra work unexpectedly, because the pandemic hit just a little bit after I had the position. And suddenly we had to pivot from all of these in-person programs and in-person fun outreach events, and really had to advocate for getting ourselves virtually caught up with the rest of
Mhm.
the world. It took much longer than it should have because of red tape, which I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with. Um, and I had to basically reinvent my job to keep it relevant and to still create community connection with people in the midst of the pandemic. But truly, it was something we should have been doing all along, which was my argument, that we should have been having some hybrid opportunities for community members who couldn't come in.
Yeah, it's more accessible, right? Physically, financially. Folks that have hourly wages can't take off to come to library events, right? Or if
Right,
there's physical disabilities or other things, childcare that prevent you from coming, you can still participate. So,
right.
I
Bus
do want to
fare.
acknowledge the positive impact that you had during that time. And I think give yourself a little credit too for you know, this isn't all about how Rachel stayed too long at her job. This is about Rachel made a huge difference.
Mm.
And eventually it became too much of a price to pay personally, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the midst of all this, I was by myself doing it. So the job didn't have any sort of assistant. There wasn't a staff. It's sole person, one person.
Mhm. Sole contributor. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a real tough one too. I think,
Yeah.
um, and I think a lot of people might be in those positions, right? Where whether you're the only person who does your type of job in a system, or you don't have team members reporting to you, or colleagues, peers that you feel you can partner with or ask for help from, right? Culturally, asking for help in some environments is just, you would never, right?
Right.
I think it takes a certain amount of psychological safety in the work environment you're in to say, raise your hand and say, I'm drowning, I need help.
Mhm.
Or I can do these 5 things, but you gave me 15. How do we want to sort through, prioritize, figure that out, right? But that requires a certain amount of safety, psychological safety,
Mhm.
to do that.
Right. Yeah, and, I think places not having sufficient staff isn't unusual.
Not unusual, not having good resources, right? So the red tape you mentioned about just being, we were just joking before we got on, right? Like, oh, was that equipment you bought yourself, paid for yourself? But certainly teachers, any teachers listening might relate, right? Oh, you supplemented the resources with your not-for-profit paycheck to ensure that you had the things you needed. And I'm guessing also like used your personal computer to produce videos, all this kind of, all these things, right?
Mhm.
That's just extra investment time of your hard-earned dollars. And that's not uncommon, right? In nonprofit, that's not
Mhm.
uncommon. Not a reason in isolation to leave one's job, but just, we're talking about this sort of like growing laundry list of challenges that
Right.
that Rachel was experiencing.
Yes, that continue to build and build. Um, and so, by the time we came back to being in person, we had a vibrant virtual set of programs and outreach, as well as the in-person large events. And so, I'm running an in-person event, also monitoring the chat because we're live streaming the event as well. Um, and just trying to do so many moving parts all on my own. And I can multitask, but I can't do the impossible.
Right.
And after 4 years or so of attempting to, the burnout just built
Mhm.
and built and built and built.
And
And
burnout can happen in jobs that we love, right? So parsing it out a little bit more too, like Rachel does a job at the library, or did a job at the library she loved, right? And for our audience, Rachel is a huge extrovert. She is energized by being around people. So this job was nothing but community engagement, right? Being with them, being with people, doing all the things that she loves doing.
Mhm.
So there's a catch 22 there too, because you can burn out when
Mhm.
you're nonstop doing something you love, but it's not resourced properly, or you're just stretched too thin, all those types of things. So you can burn out from things that are right in your wheelhouse that you love. It's your dream job. So like, that's just a call out too. Like,
Mhm.
and I had a similar experience years ago, working in marketing for a university. I was doing amazing things. But we were just a small team, and there's a lot of challenging interpersonal relationships
Mhm.
and dynamics there, external and internal. And it just became exhausting. So I think there is this sort of oh, but it's such a cool job, or such, I do these amazing
Right.
things, or there's one aspect that you just love, right? So that can help mask some of the
Mhm.
um looking forward to an individual event versus like, and I want to talk about this a little bit, like the manifestation of like some of the symptoms of it might be time to leave, which include uh Sunday night scaries, or
Uh-huh.
dread, or there's a lot of laundry list things. And one thing that I can relate to personally, that I had it, this was at a different job many, many years ago, um, pulling up to the office again, 15 years ago, pulling up to an office and like having to literally take a deep breath and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to try and go in here. Right. And
Mhm.
Rachel, you had even more of a hard time with that, right? Like could you share a little bit about your experience of like pulling up to the workplace?
Yeah, yeah, and so, like, the drive in, it's dread the whole time, and for me, walking in those doors every day was a reminder of things that had happened to my brother, reminder of times when I had had to go up and speak in front of the board of trustees about, issues, regarding censorship, and limiting access to certain groups of people, and it's like having a trauma response, you
Mm-hmm.
know, every day is a reminder, and I loved a lot of the people that I worked with. I've made lifelong friends from the people uh, in that organization. Again, which I'm sure is not an uncommon thing to hear people say, but the trauma outweighed
Yeah.
the positive relationships eventually. And the things that really built too, besides having a baby,
Let's just throw that in. She also had a baby.
yeah, that happened. Didn't take didn't take maternity leave like a normal person would take maternity leave. Like many places, we had unpaid maternity leave, um, but not paid maternity leave.
It's a separate podcast. We'll
Yep,
do one
that's
on
what.
that later. Yeah.
Let's, yeah. But also, like, I had to constantly check in on things to keep everything running because I was the only one who knew how to do everything.
Hmm.
I was the only one who was getting the communication from all of these outside presenters. I'm getting, hundreds of emails a day, and I mean, and literally drowning in emails.
On
Um,
maternity leave,
on
unpaid
maternity,
maternity leave.
yes,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think it's, I want to ask how it feels to say that out loud and like be vulnerable and share that with a listening audience because it's hard. That is a
hmm,
hard thing to admit.
yeah,
There's an aspect of like, I'm the only I'm the only one that insert here is such a powerful driver for us as individuals. I think particularly as women,
hmm,
it's really difficult. Like but I'm the only one that, and the answer, and it's a hard thing to do, is you had to let it not happen. Like if you're
right,
on unpaid maternity leave or paid maternity leave, if you're on leave,
hmm,
you are not supposed to be doing your job. And in fact, in different places, it's actually like not totally legal to have people working when they're on leave. Like that's, um,
yeah,
in corporate environments, which I'm more familiar with, like your email gets turned off and you're not allowed to have access. Like, so I think that's just like how flipped some of this stuff can get. And I think often, again, whether, my experience in a university or other types of nonprofits, like can get real blurry real quick, but that, I think that's a watch out too. But I'm the only
yeah,
one that. So,
hmm,
meaning there's not a culture of cross training, there's not a culture of shared responsibility. And again, it's just back to, did you feel psychologically safe enough to, before you left, to be like, hey, no one else does any of the stuff that I do? Or did you just go like, well, I'll just try and keep the plate spinning while I'm on unpaid maternity leave
yeah, and
and
that's what I did.
recovering from the full blown experience of having a baby during COVID, I might add.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Right, when everything's locked down. Yeah, no, and that's what I did. I just tried to keep the plates spinning,
Mhm.
and saying it out loud, having time to reflect on it. I can't believe I let myself be in that position. No, my husband took a video of me working up until I want to say it was like 11 p.m. the night before I was to go to the hospital. And it even said, "Are you proud of yourself?" And I was just like, "No."
No. And I will tell you my experience, even in different environments where I know we have amazing parental leave programs,
Hmm.
female leaders emailing up to and until they go through the double doors to deliver, right? Like, hey, I'm going to the hospital. I'm going into labor. I just want to let everybody know, like, what? Like, like,
Yeah.
oh, I
What am
just wanted to get this one last thing in. And like, they're superheroes. Like it's a monumental ability. But also it speaks to the strength of women, but also we should not be doing that. We should not. And I think
right?
that's our hope too in sharing this too, is like, that's just want to say out loud, you should not have to, you should not do it.
No.
And it seems so impossible when you're in it. I,
Mhm.
again, in that another previous experience of mine, I was at a place for 7 years, did not take a vacation or time off without checking my email, being constantly connected. I'm going to date myself to my BlackBerry. I will go ahead and just, for the kids out there, that was pre iPhone.
Mhm.
But like being glued to literally 7 years, did not fully log off for 7 years, nights, weekends, vacations. And surprisingly, I burn out, right? And I was doing, again, that was one of the jobs where I was doing really cool things here and there. And some aspects of the work were like amazing that I got to
Mhm.
do. So again, it prolonged, that experience. Like I think after, a year of no vacations or nights or weekends off, I might have started to been like, you know what, there's a flag here I should be aware of.
Right.
Um, took Rachel 4 years, took me 7. So, there's just, if we can spare somebody even a couple of months,
Right.
that's what we're hoping to do.
We'll take it.
But all those things, right? So now as a people leader and in this coaching I do now, like it's something I really focus in on. Like if, and as leaders, we have to model that. So that's the other challenge to, hey, if you're out there listening and you send an email, submitting an expense report before you had a baby, or I'm making it up, but like, let's like also really push ourselves to stop that and lead for those below us, that if they don't see you taking time off, they're not going to do it. If they don't see you unplugging for a week, I just came off a week's vacation from my, full-time gig. I'm proud to say I did not check email once.
Mhm.
We have a policy at our team, like, hey, if something urgent happens, text me and I'm happy to jump in and help you out. Cause there is also a level of responsibility when you're in certain leadership roles. So like but balance it, right? Don't check every
Mhm.
day waiting for the urgent thing, log off. And if something urgent does happen, the team will let you know, right?
Mhm.
Also, most of the time, empowered teams can take care of stuff. But, when I'm the only one who insert
Right.
here, that's a tough situation. So again, all that to say, like, I get it. I totally get it. And I'm sure other people are going, yeah, but I'm the only one.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not
Then the
enough.
system, the
Right.
system isn't right. If the system will break when you leave it, that's another thing to be mindful of, right?
Right.
Just another sort of sign, like,
Mhm.
will the thing literally not get done while you're
Right.
gone? Yeah, totally possible.
Yeah, and what you're saying too about setting an example. I had a supervisor didn't do what I did um in terms of job duties, but he was my supervisor and I got emails from him at all hours, and also he was checking email on vacation. And so I felt like I had to as well.
Mhm.
There was always some sort of crisis, which sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. And I worked for a library at the time, but things that were deemed crises. And
Yeah,
so I
I'm in marketing, right? Like, I'm not saving lives. I'm not a
right,
cardiologist. Like, you know, things
yeah,
happen. But
yeah,
yeah.
no one's going to die because of some library program. But, I did the same thing, checking constantly, the nights, weekends, vacations. At the time of this recording, I have been out of that particular job for just about a month now,
Mhm.
and it's the first time in many years since I haven't been checking email with dread, waiting for
Mhm.
some other shoe to drop or something. Um, and so,
Can
yeah.
we talk a little bit about you know, the like, dread is such a powerful thing, and I think it's hard to acknowledge, and I think, like, nobody has unpacked dread. Like, nobody's really like, where's Brene? I wish Brene Brown would do one on dread, right? Like, she's
Yes.
so good at unpacking feelings.
Mhm.
Um, and the Atlas of the Heart, it may be in there. I did read that a while back, so apologies, Brene, if it's in there. But
He's listening.
yeah, she's listening. Dream big.
Mhm.
So, but all that to say, like, dread is this powerful, powerful shame. And I think she's done a ton of work on shame. So I'll link it to
Yes.
that, right? Like, it's a shame. It to me feels like a shame-based emotion. So we don't share it, we don't talk about it, we don't acknowledge it. Because to say out loud, I'm really dreading going to work. I really am dreading opening this email. And that hunched up shoulders, right? When you're like
Yes.
all tense and your shoulders are up to your ears and you like notice like you're hunched over your email, like all that, like you got to just like relax those shoulders and to take a
Mhm.
breath, like when you're not in that state or the opposite of that state, like is just so difficult. And,
Mhm.
I think that's a big piece of why we don't acknowledge it, why things get extended so long is I felt a certain amount of shame, like I should just be able to manage this better or differently. And you know, then I wouldn't be dreading it if I was more organized, if I had more, and you sacrifice your self-care too. Like I stopped exercising for years when, um, I was doing that nonstop workload,
Mhm.
right? That